Well, I just sat through a very passionate debate on Middle East politics, and so I think that is a perfect segue into this discussion of the equally peaceful world of water. I'm really grateful that I have this opportunity, particularly today, to share with you where we're at, dispel some of the myth of what is and what isn't, and give you a snapshot of how we see ourselves moving forward, particularly over the next 24 months. I'm sure it didn't come as a surprise to very many of us that for the first time in the history of the Colorado River, there will be a significantly reduced release from Lake Powell to Lake Mead. Now, just as a matter of backdrop, let me put in perspective what Lake Powell and Lake Mead represent. Lake Mead, and I'm going to put this in non-technical terms, Lake Mead essentially is the lower basin storage reservoir. It feeds the 3 lower basin states of Arizona, California, Nevada, and it meets the obligations under the 1949 Treaty of the United States for deliveries into Mexico, 1.5 million acre feet. Lake Powell was demanded by the 4 upper basin states at the time the Boulder Canyon Project Act went through Congress. They knew that the Colorado River ran erratic, that it would have dry spells and it would have wet spells. Embedded in the compact is a delivery obligation. They have to deliver to the lower basin 75 million acre feet over 10 years. If they fail to do so, the lower basin can render a call, which means the upper basin states of Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico have to cut off their users until that lower basin delivery obligation is met. So it is the storage reservoir and savings account, if you will, for the 4 upper basin states to meet their obligations by compact to the lower basin. They have to. Now, from our perspective, it's also our savings account. What the Bureau of Reclamation determined was that the hydrology in the last 2 years, and it's been the worst 2 years back to back in hydrology that the system has ever experienced, will drop Lake Powell down to an elevation of 3575 or slightly below. That is a catastrophic number for Lake Powell, because to put it in layman's terms, a reservoir that can hold 25 million acre feet will have 9 left in it. So the more we drain Lake Powell, the quicker we take water from Lake Powell, the more at risk we put all 7 states. The more at risk we put ourselves that the next winter won't be wet, that Lake Powell won't recover as it did in 2011. And that little bit that we have left, we took too much in the early years. So in 2007, when the states agreed to shortage regimen on the Colorado River, they said, we're going to balance these reservoirs. We, the lower basin, will not issue a call from now until 2026, and we didn't do anything in perpetuity. We're not getting out over our skis again the way they did at the beginning of the 20th century. We're going to adapt as conditions change. And between now and 2026, we, the lower basin, will not render a call. We will work with the upper basin, and the upper basin in return will deliver more water to Lake Mead when it starts recovering faster, which it would not have done under the old regimen. But if conditions start getting tight, we, the lower basin, will allow less to be delivered to Lake Mead, benefiting everyone in the system. That was then further added on to last year in December, when we entered into Minute 319 with the country of Mexico. And a minute is this unique mechanism by which the 2 state departments and the 2 administrations of the 2 countries can make operational changes to the Colorado River that don't constitute a treaty amendment and thereby require ratification by the Senate. Under that minute, Mexico agreed that it would take its share of a shortage too when we get into shortages, and that it would begin rotationally fallowing agricultural fields, which are their predominant recipients of Colorado River water, sooner, and store that water in Lake Mead. So when I hear from the Bureau of Reclamation the elevations that I'll share with you here in a minute and that are triggering our concern, it's even of greater concern to me because I know that Lake Mead is 10 feet higher than it would normally be. Between the water that we as SNWA have banked in Lake Mead, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the Central Arizona Project, and the country of Mexico, we've been able to raise Lake Mead by 10 feet. So today, Lake Mead is approaching 1,100. It's sitting right over 1,100. It would be at 1090 already. Despite that, that reduced release of 750,000 acre-feet less from Lake Powell to Lake Mead means that Lake Mead starts dropping much faster. And as I've described for you in the past, Lake Mead is a V. So the further you go down in the reservoir, the faster the rate of decline. Lake Powell has another little nuance that we have to guard against, because I can't tell you how many people have yelled at me over the last couple of weeks that we should just have more water released from Lake Powell. There's one little thing you have to remember. If we draw that reservoir down too fast and it hits 3490, at 3490, that's the power pool for Glen Canyon Dam, shuts off all electrical production of Glen Canyon, mostly benefiting, that power mostly benefits the upper basin, but all of White Pine County depends on Glen Canyon Dam. That's where Ely and the communities in White Pine County receive their energy from. At 3490, the water can no longer get into the penstocks, which means there's no way water can leave Lake Powell and get down to Lake Mead. The only way you can get water downstream at that point is there are 2 diversion channels around Glen Canyon Dam that were constructed to move the river out of the way while they constructed the dam, and the most you can get through those is 5 million acre-feet, which would even further expedite the decline in Lake Mead. Now for us, it represents 2 issues. One is the one that was of first and foremost concern to us, which is our facilities issue. I know I've described for you before that we have currently 2 intakes in Lake Mead. One sits at elevation 1050. Pumping capacity for that intake dies at 1050. And the second one that was completed in 1971. And the second one that we built in the mid-90s goes down to elevation 1000. That's why we are right now building the 3rd intake. And the 3rd intake, we've gone down over 600 feet, and we are boring 3.5 miles underneath Lake Mead. That project is moving very well at this point. Early on, we had some soils issues. We're in good soils right now. We're not in closed mode anymore. We're in open mode. And so the machine is moving much faster. We're making great progress. But we don't expect to have that intake completed before December 14, January 15, and that's if we have no more glitches. What the Bureau said was that even with normal hydrology, which means 100% of normal runoff, and the last 2 years back to back, we've had 40% of normal. If we get 100% of normal runoff and have a decent snow year on the west slope of the Rockies, Lake Mead will sit at 1062 by April of 2015. Now, I said that that first intake was constructed in 1971, is when it was completed. Our engineers are very nervous that even though the pumps can go down to 1050, the intake structure won't work at 1050, won't go down all the way to 1050. that somewhere between 1065 and 1050, it'll break suction. When that happens, we lose 40% of our capacity into southern Nevada. It is 100% of the supply for Boulder City. It is 100% of the supply for Henderson. So for us, losing Alfred Merritt Smith, losing that upper intake has some catastrophic consequences to it, with Boulder City being the most vulnerable because their facilities are on the other side, on the east side of the river mountains, and have no interconnect with the rest of the system, where Henderson is intricately intertwined with the district and the larger regional distribution system. So when we started worrying that we could possibly get a reduced release, as we were seeing the reports come in every single month from the Bureau, the engineers started kicking the tires on intake pumping station number 1 and on our old 1971 intake. There is a fix that can be made, and I'm not going to get into the engineering. If anybody wants to talk to me about it afterwards, I'll be happy to talk to you, but essentially the connector tunnel that we've built, which will service intake pumping station, or tunnel number 3, is completed, and we did a stub tunnel that can take you up to IPS 1, and we can connect them. That won't be inexpensive. But it is work that is going to have to be completed between now and April of 2014. Because in order to make that interconnection, we have to bring IPS 1 down. And we're going to have to service Boulder City out of IPS 2, which has a whole different set of issues around it, mostly operational cost issues. That's why we want to do it during our low demand time of the winter months. So we have this narrow window right now at which we can make this potential fix to pumping station number 1 and assure that it will go down all the way to 1050. Now we've bought ourselves enough time, barring a worsening of the catastrophe, to be able to keep IPS 1 in service while we finish the 3rd intake. What keeps me awake at night now is that we have a repetition of 2002. If we have another 25% year, which was the worst year ever, then we won't get 7.48 million acre feet out of Powell, we'll get 7. So the amount coming from Powell will be further reduced. We can get through this. We're putting all the resources that we need to bear, but I'm going to have to use a section of the NRS which allows me to, quote, declare an emergency, because that allows me to forego the Purchasing Act, it allows me to forego the Contract Act, it allows me to sign a change order with the contractor that's already on site, and before he demobilizes, and have him connect that stub tunnel to IPS number 1. We're right now finalizing the discussions with Renda. I'm going to have to do that here in the next several days in order to get the bulkhead ordered and all the material ordered and everything we need ordered to get that work done during the winter months. If we do that, then there will not be a need for any draconian measures in southern Nevada. We can get through the summer of 2014 with no problem. And if we can get the 3rd intake completed by the end of 14, beginning of 15, we're out of the woods for the short-term facilities issue that we have. You have to remember that one of the things we did when the economy crashed in 2008, we were looking at what projects can we postpone. And one of the ones we postponed, because it's about $400 million, is the pump station that moves water out of IPS, out of the 3rd intake. So we're relying on intake number 2. Locally, there are some issues that have to be addressed by the city of Henderson. Henderson has its own treatment plant that takes water from the old BMI line. That will lose water at 1050. All of Lake Las Vegas is connected to that. Any number of neighborhoods in Henderson are connected to that treatment plant. The raw water from the BMI line fills Lake Las Vegas. So we're right now talking to Henderson about that interconnection so that we take advantage of the time that we have. We have to assume we're going to break 1050 because we can't wait till we get so close because we run out of time to make the necessary structural changes to the facilities. It was something that we hoped wasn't going to happen until after we had our third intake in, to be very honest with you. But the rate of change in the climatic conditions around the Colorado River are just escalating faster than anyone in the scientific community had predicted. And so I don't know what this winter brings. You are looking at, I'm going to go to Mass every Sunday and pray for a 2011. I told Bishop, that's his job. If we don't have a 2011, we're going to have to address these issues. So the difficult decision for us was, do we take the risk and assume we're going to have a 2011 and have recovery in Lake Powell and avoid the costs that we're going to incur? Or do we assume that the worst is going to be facing us and we get ourselves ready and the community has the necessary facilities to get through? I mean, one day we're going to need that stub tunnel. We're going to need that interconnection. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Protecting ourselves now and getting those facilities put in place is critically important. We might as well do it and protect ourselves against what potentially could lay ahead. The second issue for us is what can we, as the 7 states do, and the country of Mexico, to help the system recover at a quicker speed. Now, you probably saw the story with that Henry ran, that the Review Journal ran, and Henry Breen was the reporter on that story, where Henry and I started having a discussion about emergencies. And here was my thinking on that. I was never envisioning us going to the governor requesting a declaration of emergency for Southern Nevada. It is a change in thinking at the congressional level. And it's a change in thinking around, should we not be putting our money into and our efforts into avoiding catastrophes rather than draining our economy time and time and time again by sending money to the victims of Sandy, sending money to the victims of tornadoes. This is a catastrophe that can be averted, and the federal government has a huge nexus to the Colorado River. They have a trust obligation with the Indian tribes to whom they deliver water and power. They run all the electrical energy generation and marketing out of both Glen Canyon and Hoover and all the smaller dams along the system. The power users have a huge nexus to the Colorado River. Preserving Lake Powell elevations and Lake Mead elevations is all important to them. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years on this river system, money has a way of fixing some problems. So my point with Henry was, it's time for the federal government to step up, assume its responsibility, and somehow avail the 7 states with some resources to help them get through. We are looking as the 7 states now at short-term, medium-term, and longer-term solutions. Obviously, between now and December, our efforts are all focused on what short-term potentials do we have that we can prop up Lake Mead and Lake Powell. What conservation programs, be they ag, be they urban, can be brought to the table to allow users to leave water behind in the system? What kind of arrangements can be made financially? How much more can Mexico produce? Anything to keep those reservoirs up right now while we look at the medium term of what the longer term solutions are. The one thing we have going for us as the states is that for the last 20 years, there has been a real change in tone between the states. I'll tell you one thing, there is no way we have enough time to sue anybody. You just don't have the time to do it. Maintaining our relationships as close as they are now with our neighbors on this river system, respecting their politics, respecting their unique uses, and working with them to minimize their strengths and take advantage of, minimize their weaknesses, take advantage of their strengths. All of us together, we can get through this. The feds have to be a partner. They've always been a partner in this process. It's been a very state-dominated, as the United States found out during the treaty negotiations with Mexico. It was the ultimate collision of the treaty clause with the compact clause of the Constitution. Because the United States has primacy in international negotiations, but they had nothing with which to negotiate. So they had to bring the states into the room. The relationship among the states had improved to the point where we allowed 2 individuals to represent 7 states. I'm particularly proud that one of them is my chief deputy, and was the one that was sitting at the table during those very difficult technical discussions. Our relationships with Mexico has improved, our relationships amongst the states have improved, and we are going gas pedal down to find a solution that will get all of the states through this difficult knothole while we await some relief from Mother Nature. I mean, let's be frank. It is going to snow again in the Rocky Mountains. There is going to be another 2011. There may even be a series of years of 2011. We can even see a recovery of the system. The problem is when we look over the last 105 years of recorded history on the Colorado River system, what we see is that going forward, over the next 50 years to 60 years, we will be in shortage over 50% of the time. We will be below 1075. If you just look at historic hydrology, I'm not even talking about overlaying it with climate hydrology. We will be in shortage conditions in this river basin over 50% of the time. If you overlay climate change, or you take some of the more recent runs and you look at it, we'll be in catastrophic conditions. There has to be a longer-term discussion about what does the Colorado River community do. Everybody's looking for that silver bullet solution, and there is no silver bullet solution. It is a mosaic that will very carefully be made up of various pieces. It will be made up of conservation. It will be made up of retooling agricultural water use, bringing in technologies allowing food to be grown with less water. It'll involve desalting ocean water through exchanges, which are much easier talked about than effectuated. And it will mean that the 7 states are going to have to look outside their basin for some solutions. Those pieces are all on the table. Arizona and Nevada are dogged on the issue of augmentation, that it has to be a part of the solution. We can't live crisis to crisis. The one thing we will have accomplished by the end of this grueling exercise is we won't need to build any more facilities into Lake Mead. We will have our intake down at elevation 860. We may still have to build that 3rd pump station, and I think that's a conversation you're going to see being pursued over the course of the next year, because it'll actually be able to take water from 860. But everyone on the river can sit down and describe for you what the other states' issues are, what their hot buttons are, what their user profile is, and understand the difficulties of what lies ahead. Our ability to maneuver through this process is going to be all important for Southern Nevada. And I am optimistic despite as difficult as it is. I've seen us tackle difficult issues before. We will find solutions that will work. And I know that we'll be able to get through our facilities issues, because the last thing we want is to in any way, shape, or form become an economic problem for Southern Nevada. And we will do what we have to do, build the facilities we have to build, but we have to remember, we're taking 90% of our resource from this, of our water supply from this one very fickle river. Will we have to have the conversation about the in-state project at some point? Yeah, absolutely. That it's inevitable, and it's a timing issue. It is a matter of, will other measures come to bear? Will they bear fruition first? Or will the progress of what we're seeing and experiencing move at such a rapid clip that Southern Nevada won't have a choice but to take on this issue that the state so very much doesn't want us to take on? It will become a decision of survival. So having said all that, probably the best for me would be just to open it up to questions. Any questions you might have? Yeah?
Yeah, I recall when Lake Las Vegas was built, the political process that supposedly at least 2% of our allotment of the Colorado River, maybe it wasn't built. Is there any ability to that?
No. For me, it's a facilities issue. You know, the legislature allowed the locals, allowed us to ban artificial lakes, but grandfathered 3 in. The lakes at Sahara, Desert Shores, and Lake Las Vegas. And they're going to be there. There's a lot of real estate around it. Saying you're going to dry that up makes no sense whatsoever. My problem is getting raw Colorado River water to Lake Las Vegas. That's Henderson's big headache. Yeah.
In-state solution, isn't that the inevitability, 2030, 2050? Aren't we talking really about getting that organized sooner than later?
I think there will be some trigger elevations that we reach in Lake Mead where that will absolutely start causing the conversation to happen.
What's your time frame for that if it does get critical?
You tell me what Mother Nature's going to do.
2 more 40% years.
When we break 1075, that conversation is going to have to be on the table. It could be as early as 2015. And I know it's very unpopular, but to imagine that, I mean, hopefully we'll be able to put some short-term measures in. I'm pretty confident we will be. That will help prop up those lakes to get us through. But when we have to have the ugly discussions with the states of what do we do below 1025, because below that elevation we've not agreed to any cuts. Nevada's going to be the ugly sister at the party, which is you cannot break elevation 1000. Period, end of conversation. For us it's a water quality issue and it's a water quantity issue. Taking that position means we're going to have to absorb a cut. I mean, it's just that simple. I mean, whether the cut is meaningful to the system or not is pretty irrelevant because the others are going to get cut back too. I mean, when Mead hits 1025, the state of Arizona has its deliveries in the Central Arizona Project cut in half. That puts Phoenix, Mesa, Scottsdale, Tucson, all on an instant diet. So, yes?
Are there excess water deposits, I guess, in other parts of the country that can be sent here?
That has been something that is increasingly starting to be discussed. Interestingly enough, probably our biggest partner is Kansas. It's going to be very much an issue of transportation up and down the Mississippi. That is such a huge transportation vein for the barges bringing all the grains and all the agricultural produce down. My friends in New Orleans say, please do it tomorrow. Take it now. I think that's a conversation that will happen. There are a lot of impediments to them. One is that there are 33 states in the Mississippi watershed. And I've had more than my fun with 7. Yeah,
If you need the Wizard of Oz from Kansas to solve that problem, right?
there you go. Are you volunteering?
I have a couple of comments. Number one, it's my understanding that we use 5% of the 7.5 million acre feet that supposedly comes to the lower basin.
Right.
So we really don't control our own destiny as far as that's concerned. I've always heard that number. What is the stabilized flow, today? I know that the law of the river was done many years ago. What is the stabilized flow? And
Right.
what can be done to manage that downstream so we can actually get into a stable, a sustainable situation? And what is the salinization? Where does that play in terms of creating resources that take the burden off our reservoir here?
Okay, that is a lot of questions rolled into one question, which you are renowned for. I've known you too long. Let's start with what is the new average annual flow. Right now, the best scientists can do is a band. Because when you take climate science and overlay it on historic flows and you look at tree rings, at the end of the day, you've got a river system that'll fluctuate somewhere between 9 million to 14 million. The compact was based on 16.5 to 17. So we have an issue going in. Let me dispel the notion that trying to change the compact is a fruitful exercise to pursue. A compact has to be approved by 7 legislatures, signed by 7 governors, ratified by Congress, and signed by the president. I'll be way dead. And at the end of the day, you don't have to change it. It essentially allows 7 states to do whatever 7 states can agree to do, and no one state, no matter how big, no matter how large its congressional delegation, cannot roll its neighbors. We've proven that the compact is flexible over the last 20 years. It can accommodate that change that needs to happen. I will get to desal now. We've invested in a lot of studies with Met and with Arizona, and I think this is an important point. Everything we're doing in the lower Colorado, everything that we're doing for future water, we are doing absolutely in partnership with the Metropolitan Water District, with the Central Arizona Project, and ourselves. We jointly fund, we jointly participate, we do everything in tandem because we can't afford to have a competition. We have looked at desal in Mexico extensively. We've done a lot of preliminary studies around that. I tend to feel that it's more viable to come from the Mexican side first than from the California side, predominantly because of land values in California and this propensity of the residents of California to have this anathema to desalters. I mean, Carlsbad took, almost 10 years to get through permitting, and I'm not sure that last lawsuit by the surfers has been resolved in court yet. These people who have multi-million-dollar homes on the California coast don't want big, ugly desalters destroying their view shed. That's what they paid multi-million dollars for, was that beach experience. If we have a problem, no matter how much larger metropolitans' draw on the river is than ours, the magnitude of the problem is the same. So those little desalters, and volumetrically, from a water perspective, they're relatively small, are meant to serve the community that is going to endure the destruction of their viewshed. Just whispering that some of that could come to Sin City could cause hysteria to break out. I'll never forget the first desalter experience I had was in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara had put a temporary desalter in during a big drought event, and they had this investment in it and wanted us, we're now trying to market it because the day it was finished, the rains came and filled their reservoirs. So now they wanted to market this water through an exchange with Met. So I took a delegation and went to Santa Barbara, only to be told by various members of the city council and the city management team that Las Vegas was not a place they ethically wanted to see their water to go. I went, then why am I here? Why did you invite me? Let me finish.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Mexico has a different attitude. Mexico has much more undeveloped beachfront. Mexico has the need to add water resources to its northwestern growing urban population. There are some opportunities there that are going to be difficult for the Mexicans to maneuver through some of their water politics, but we're very optimistic that if this can break, it can break there first. The final piece of desalting is that we're all waiting for that big technological breakthrough when you don't have to have the power, the amount of power you need today to desalt the volumes of water that we're talking about. There's a new process called forward osmosis that is being lab tested and being tested in small pilots. It has not had large-scale application. It shows some promise. Because to be a meaningful desalter on the Colorado River system, you're talking about 1 million acre-foot plus or larger desalter. At one point, we were looking at one at Rocky Point on the Sonoran coast, and then actually pumping the water from Rocky Point to behind Imperial Dam to take care of some of the needs down at the far end of the system and leave the rest of the water in Mead and do exchanges. And then Fukushima happened. You've got some of the largest fault lines in the US running straight down into Mexico. And this one required a nuclear power plant. There's no way you can build a nuclear power plant along those faults. I mean, that thing died instantly the minute Fukushima happened. So it's not as easy as it sounds. Yes, Byron?
It isn't really one of the big answers, and I know this is a big question, is conservation, which is a very conservative notion. I mean, I assume that we use in America more water per person than any place else on the planet. And our agriculture continues to use gargantuan amounts of water, still many, many flood irrigation systems, and other places in the world where they don't have very much water, like the Middle East, Israel, other places, manage to produce more food per acre with less water than we do here. So, you know, these are big issues, and obviously it's your job to service the whole community, and we respect that. But at the end of the day, don't we as Americans have to figure out a way that our lifestyle will use a little bit less water, and wouldn't that have the greatest impact at the end of the day on preserving our ability to live in this desert for a longer period of time?
The answer to that in the short answer is yes, but not just here in Las Vegas. You're not going to fix the Colorado River problem with urban conservation. The math just doesn't work. Over 70%, 75% is ag. One of the pieces of the mosaic is to find a way to grow the same amount of food or more food using less water, which is why we have a partnership with Mekarat, the wholesaler in Israel, and that is one of the things that we are really interested in working with them and looking at the technologies around that. And we've had conversations with Met, who has an agreement with Palo Verde where we can run some pilots. That very much holds some significant promise. Urban conservation has to become the norm. I mean, the cities have to flatline. One of the things I am most proud of this community is that despite the fact that we are the driest city in the United States, our net residential water footprint now is 75 gallons per person per day. That's phenomenal.
Phenomenal
That is-
good or phenomenal?
Pardon?
Phenomenal good or phenomenal?
Oh, no, phenomenal good.
Okay.
When I took this job, we were at 365.
How much?
365. We were lush lawns on quarter acres everywhere we went. And for us, the key is outdoor conservation. We're also one of the few cities, if not the only city, that recycles 93% of its wastewater and reuses it. So, I mean, all those things that other communities have they're still on that journey. City of Los Angeles has come to us. They've gotten our whole Cash for Grass program, and they are now implementing it in Los Angeles. Sandy, it is a cultural thing, and the other cities are starting to step up. So when you do it, there will be a demand hardening point. And you have to be very careful as you get to that demand hardening point that you haven't committed it to everybody else to use, because then you have no cushion. Yes,
At what level do they start having to shut down turbines in Tam?
in Hoover,
Yes.
1050.
And
They have one new turbine that they've installed that can generate at lower elevations. Here's one of my big frustrations. Unfortunately, there's 4 more that have not been replaced, and they are no longer manufactured in the United States. So they're in China. It's the only place you can get them now, those large-scale turbines. There's no way we'll get them all 4 replaced in the next 2 years.
So 1050, how much of the power gets reduced?
Just about all of it.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty ugly. And Western Power Administration has the obligation to go on the market and buy replacement power for that, which means everyone who's got Hoover Power is going to see their power bill go up, which is why in our joint pursuit of finding solutions on the Colorado River, our power partners are, huge. CREDA, Western Power Administration, they have to be part of the mix.
Vegas doesn't get any power from
Oh yeah, and NV Energy does, and we do. And BMI is all Hoover Power. Lincoln County is Hoover Power, Boulder City is Hoover Power, Moapa is Boulder Power, Mesquite is Boulder Power. Hoover Power, Boulder City's power bills will go through the roof.
But Las Vegas itself?
Las Vegas, Michael and I have talked about it any number of times. It's such a small percentage of the overall mix of power sources that it's not going to have that kind of effect. The same for SNWA. There are pockets in southern Nevada, though, where you have Boulder City's municipal power. They're not on the NV Energy system, and they rely exclusively on Hoover Power. Yes?
Asking the question another way, assuming you could have an import program, whether it's from Kansas to Canada or Columbia River, how much
Please don't say
water-
the Columbia. Several,
How much water would it take to stabilize the Colorado River?
about 3 million acre feet a year. It's not a huge amount.
3 million a day?
No, 3 million a year.
A year, 3 more than,
3 million a year. At that point, you can create some real stability in the system.
because what you haven't talked about is further growth in the Southwest.
But all the cities, all the growth is happening on the same or smaller water footprint than they had before. The city of Los Angeles just adopted its new 30-year resource plan, and 100% of its new supplies for new industry coming in and new residences is coming from conservation and reuse. You have to remember that all those coastal communities in California still send their wastewater out into the ocean. They have a lot of opportunity to bring that in and apply it to their urban landscapes. We got to be careful where and how we use it, but it's possible. Yes. Thank you. I appreciate it.